Chad, what's going on, man?
We are.
Let's dive straight into what we're talking about, which is channel partnerships for early stage startups today. I would love for, I mean, you've talked about this with so many different companies for you to just give a kind of a full overview of the types of partnerships you're likely to see in tech companies. And then let's dive into some specific pitfalls and how to actually set up in these arrangements. Because as we know, they can be super beneficial and they can also be really negative if they're not set up correctly in the beginning. So yeah, please.
Yeah, it's tricky. So, right away, partnerships, what is it? It's an indirect route to the market. That's the simplest way I think I can frame it. So, what I mean by that is a lot of teams initially, you're going direct as a founder, as a salesperson on a team, you're going direct to the customer and you're trying to do a deal. You're trying to work together with them, right? That's the natural place to start. Indirect is where you can get creative. You can look at companies in your space, you can engage with them, and you can access their customer base, which is can be very, very awesome for your business, right? So to talk about the types, marketing, I think you look at it as I look at it across the customer journey. So marketing, what are marketing partnerships? Those can be things like content, co-marketing, webinars, sharing, doing overall marketing activity with a partner, with another company. That's marketing. On the sales side, you get into specifically pipeline activity, co-selling deals with another brand or another team. Customer success and sort of services, you see managed services, again, depending on how your works, you may have a partner that comes in to implement your software. Again, that usually is probably later on, but that can happen. And then finally is product partnerships, or sort of the technology integration ecosystem, which is a big one, again, depending on what your product is. So you may have integrations with a lot of other players in your space that can be of major leverage. So overarching, I think about partnerships as leverage. How do you continue to build leverage for your business? Right? There's brands that are better known out there. You're not very well known when you're early. So being able to engage with them, have a meaningful relationship and organize around that is a great way to go to market and grow. And that's really what we're talking about.
Yeah, I really think of it to simplify for B2B SaaS. It's really just two different directions. So one is there's some type of implementation or product gap needed, and you're bringing in a partner to actually deliver a full solution. And the second piece is you have the full solution, or it's simple to communicate. You're just looking for wider distribution. That's really the simple ways to look for it early. But as we've seen, when you're operating with a really big brand name and a big sales team, you can kind of get starry-eyed and things can go wrong. What are some of the issues that you've seen? And then I'd be happy to talk about some of the ones that I've seen. We've probably seen the same things.
Yeah, well, right away you just think it's going to be so easy. There's this big brand. David Goliath is kind of a good way to think about it. You have a Goliath brand that everyone knows, and you're talking to them, and they want to partner with you, and you're like, wow, this is just going to be so perfect, right? That's the one you see all the time. And then you write out, there's a piece of paper, some sort of contract that outlines what the engagement together looks like, and you feel great about it. And then it's just crickets. Nothing really happens. You're expecting the world that they're just going to like take you to their customer base and you're just going to start rolling all these deals. And it just doesn't happen. So the pitfall there is just thinking that is going to happen right away, and the amount of effort really on both sides to build that mutual trust, to build that mutual process, that joint activity that needs to be in play in order to make it work. And yeah, the pitfall is really, as a small company, you still, regardless of how big the other brand is, you still need to make that effort equal on both sides.
Yeah, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about having your shit together on enablement here, because that's so important, right? Like you go to this big Fortune 50 company, they have this huge sales team, they're talking to your ideal customer already. You kind of think it's just going to sell off the shelves. One of the main reasons that fails that I've seen is because their reps have a lot of other products in their bag other than yours that have been selling well and they know well. They know nothing about your product, and your product might actually be a bit difficult to explain. So you talk about some of the things that they need to have together before even talking about a co-sell or resell arrangement, and we can talk about the differences between those two models too.
Yeah, so let's break down, really sales enablement, as many call it. Early days, you get together a slide deck. There's sort of an extension of maybe some investor conversations as founders that are happening, and you piece together, the presentation. That's one part of many parts. So when you think about going, to enable your own team is the best way to think about it at first, right? So especially for those that have, different folks on their team, maybe in marketing, maybe in sales. Like, what is that package? What does that kit look like? I subscribe to sort of value framework is one key document that people can look up. I think it's a really, really good place to start. Sort of breaks down the gap and just like how people buy, what value they're going to get from you. And sort of you're writing that all through. That's a really good place to start. But in general, there's a total kit, right? Case studies, looking at the customer side. What customers do we have? How are we enabling our team to tell those stories is a really good place. That obviously folds into the sales cycle itself and how you support the sales cycle. So you got marketing side stuff, you got customer success side stuff, you gotta focus on both those, and then it sort of comes into the core selling. So once you have that kit together, and there's some stuff we can share, even in with folks if they're interested, but the reality is once you have that in place and you feel pretty good about how you're supporting your own team and your own efforts are working, now you can feel good about taking that to a partner, right? So you're bringing together joint stuff now. So typically what happens is you meet up, you're talking about how great this partnership is going to be. They have a sales deck, you have a sales deck. You need to merge these things and create a storyline. So we all know this stuff isn't easy to do, right? You have to bring together the creative horsepower on both sides, and you need to start melding some things together. And I always think, people need to focus on, what those early documents are going to look like first, right? You have to spend the time. And once you have that sort of kit together, now you can start to think about going to market. And that's why co-selling, I know we're going to get to this, but referral and creating deals and working together versus just expecting someone to take your deck and go and sell is definitely the place to start.
Yeah, and that's so critical. So I'm going to talk a little bit about resell versus co-sell, and then obviously I'd love your thoughts too. But that's the real danger super early. We're talking seed series A, go to the big behemoth and just enter into a full exclusive resell arrangement. They've got the sales team. They're just going to sell the hell out of my product and make me millions of dollars. I've seen that, and I've seen it fail hard. If you're early, a co-sell arrangement means that your own sales team is going to be involved, hopefully along the entire sales process. But what you absolutely need to make sure of is at the end of the customer journey that you own that relationship long-term. You have to make sure that it's your team onboarding the customer. It's your team actually supporting them and making sure it's your product, right? So that they're using it and they're going to renew with you. But you need those learnings, especially early along that whole journey, and to turn it over to another sales team and miss out on that and suddenly come to this board meeting that you have with your partner and find out sales didn't do well and it's 6 months in, really devastating and can be really bad. So I would say always enter into the co-sell arrangement and try to own the relationship at the end. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that same thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think I kind of think about that as referral versus reseller to try and separate them and think about it that way. Reseller arrangements you see out there, again, depending on what your product is or really what you do, but that's really letting the third party or the partner go to market and do their own thing with your materials, right? So you're part of their sort of basket of products. That's a very deep sort of thing that we talked about you need to get to. And early stage, very difficult to do well, right? Very difficult unless it is an integration between products and it's just out of the box and you've done the work from the code and integration perspective. That's a bit different. But in terms of having a selling relationship or commercially, you're closing a sales cycle for those that are not just self-serve, it gets tricky quick. This is definitely the muddiest part that I see. You want to start with kind of that really collaborative approach, more referring business to each other, sharing pipeline, building on content. It's a bit more kind of marketing focused. I think about it that way. So, you're able to nicely nowadays do webinars and do things like podcasts like we're doing and talk with a customer and talk about the shared value that can be created to each other's customer base, and that ultimately can create pipeline and deal flow for both parties. And then to your point, it really comes down to, okay, well, how does the transaction take place? Right. Then who owns that post sale? So you do need to map this. I think, again, a pitfall is that people only focus on that. It's only a sales focused thing. Like, we just want to close deals, but it has to be the entire journey. When you're thinking about building your partner program, you have to look at literally everything from marketing, how leads work in your business and how things come in, to how you manage it long tail, how you renew the customer and what have you. And so there's various ways we need to do that. There's contracts, the way that you construct those contracts, the way you think about terms. But to your point, co-selling and collaborative behavior, especially for the early stage companies, is the way to do it, feel that out together, figure out, how your products make value for the end customer, figure out how you can create some leads for each other, figure out how you can close some deals. And then from there, you start to progress towards, and your enablement progresses as well, right? To be able to start to think about a partner standing alone, and reselling and distributing your product without you involved. And I think it's a natural progression across that spectrum.
Yeah, it comes back to a topic that you and I have covered a lot, and it actually just gets me thinking about it. It's like nothing gives you the right to skip sales early. You can't skip this whole process and getting in front of customers and hearing bad feedback and iterating on it and dealing with the losses and all of that stuff. It doesn't matter how big of a sales organization you enter into or how big that engine is. You have to be in those meetings, and you have to have a sales team that can take those meetings on their own, or else you're just too dependent on something else.
Yeah, I think a key thing there is, we're very much speaking from the sales teams, that's in the business. There is obviously businesses that are self-serve and are very product led, where partnering or having, tight integration or API, between products can be very can be great, frankly. But, we are speaking about, just to clarify, you have two sales teams on either side. You have folks that are trying to do business, they're trying to grow the company from that perspective. And so you really need to be cognizant of that, because it can get muddy otherwise.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, where have you seen some of these relationships get success? We talked about the terms of the partnership agreements. One of the key terms that I always say is that it can usually just be something simple, like you agree to onboarding with the core producer of the product. But what other terms do you see as being important for successful early partner relationships that you've seen?
Yeah, really, it comes down to the economics of the deals and working through margin and whatnot together, right? To your point, it's about who originates the deal, like anything else. If it's a referral relationship, which I personally like to start with, let's just figure out, okay, we know that here's our customer base. We're at this stage, you're at that stage. There's open discussion, there's trust built up front before any sort of deal making or sales cycles happen, right? So I think you got to start there. Really, from there, it's, if we speak about SaaS companies, where you have a recurring revenue, the margins are there on the product to be able to provide good incentives, right? Good economics to the deal. You tend to see anywhere between like 10, I've seen even up to 50% of the first year's contract value being provided to the referring party. So if you bring a deal to the table with say an existing customer of yours and you have this partnership aligned, there's typically, that's core of the discussion, is really what is that sort of maybe it's take rate or percentage, however you want to think about the commission aspect of the referral. So you want to talk through that in detail and really understand intimately the process on both sides, right? Like really, what is the cost of serving, the cost of acquisition, which we all talk about a lot, right? So understanding those things on both sides, and then just kind of meeting somewhere in the middle as it relates to who's going to get really that share, that revenue share, is the main one, I think. From there, exclusivity you brought up, sometimes there's situations that do come up, and this is just to highlight for folks where, again, if you have that bigger company, the Goliath, as we're calling it, versus your startup, there may be exclusivity comes into the conversation. So you need to be really careful about that one. I mean, naturally, you don't want to close yourself off. I've seen things like head start clauses be typical. And if that comes up, where it's like, what, we will, for this market, for this product, for this, segmentation, provide X months in exclusivity, right? Never lock yourself up to full exclusivity. Obviously, it's a big open space depending on the space you play in, but that's something you can think about. That can also be paid for by the partner, right? If they do see a big revenue opportunity in their space for your product, which is really what you're aligning on, you could even ask for that to be sort of an incentive that's paid by them of some value, because you're going to give them a head start in that market for 6 months or for X months. So those are some things to think about. But bottom line, it usually breaks down to, we're all trying to grow revenue. We have revenue targets. We're creating an indirect channel together. What can this channel contribute to our revenue goal? And then you're working against that. And that's where you work with your finance team, or, if you're earlier than that, you get some support on it, but you break down exactly how, this is going to impact your top line revenue and ultimately your costs and fee structure in your business.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned exclusivity because I've seen arrangements too that block out your own sales team from selling, and that can be like as you said, can be really dangerous, right? I mean, just on the legal side to make sure that you've really thought about the contract and what it's limiting you to.
Yeah, and I think, just to touch on contracts again, let's not overemphasize. I mean, obviously you being a lawyer, we can get right into contracts right away and talk contracts. But the reality of alignment just in general as two parties, right? I think the contract, the piece of paper, like anything else, gets put in place and it matters in this case, but you really want to think about how your products come together and create that additional value and just really thinking through that lens is most important. The terms and all of that naturally seem to come together with the best partnerships. I think if you get stuck in like heavy upfront legal conversations around all these terms and whatnot right away, I think you want to caution that. I think usually it's more about can we play well together in the sandbox here? Can we do some marketing? Can we do some content and really test this market out, test this segment that we both support or serve, and then things start to naturally roll. So you can sort of take it step by step. I think that's a good way to think about it as well.
Yeah, I mean, especially on the relationship governance side, if you're dealing with a really, really big company, you want to be bought in at a high level and you want to be meeting with them regularly. This isn't something that you check in on once a quarter as much as you can get. And especially because it's a big company, you need to be bought in at a senior VP level because it just takes them that long to move around on things. If you don't have a senior exec helper here, it's going to be tough for you to get anything serious shifted or done if you need to.
It's worth probably talking about some of the tools as well, because nowadays there's a growing ecosystem around how to establish your partner program and partner channels. And like anything else, there's tech, there's software, there's ways to sort of think about how your pipeline matches up, right? As an example, and just there's nice portals that you could set up that are actually quite inexpensive and quite simple to operate in. So you can have people log into stuff and you can manage your deals. You can sort of create that extension. So that's probably, we could go down that path a little bit in terms of setting up and talking about that. But I think the main thing is, at first realize that it's going to be work. It's not great, like we've said. You don't just hand it off to someone else that's not really a part of your business as a third party and think that it's just gonna fly. You got to put in that foundational work. You have to think through, okay, that this is where we've proven out our direct model and we've done the work to segment our market and support our market, and we've literally proven that out. We have social proof, et cetera. Like, you kind of need to get there first. And so I would push people to really think through direct first as founders, as early team members. Like, figure that out before you really jump into the partnership. You can test it, and I'm not saying every business should not look at the other distribution channels, but know that setting up a partner channel is going to be work. It's going to take your eye off of, it's longer term thinking. It's a longer tail approach. Direct is always going to be quicker for you to test and to iterate on. Indirect can be very fruitful, but it does take more time and it does take more calories, and you just need to be aware of that.
Yeah, for sure. As we've said, there are critical steps that you just can't skip. So we've talked about some of the pitfalls. Let's talk about some of the big opportunities. I think the big opportunity, right, especially when you're testing things early, you've got maybe this SMB channel, you want to go for enterprise, but as we all know, super difficult sales cycle and they take forever. The real advantage to channels here for me is the fact that you can significantly shorten these sales cycles. And I've seen this actually work, right? You have an existing MSA. You don't necessarily have to go through a crazy info security process or a corporate security or third-party risk management. These are terms that a lot of founders don't even know until they're deep in the process. And it's a 4-month review to get their deal that they thought that they would win, maybe in 1 month. So that there's a massive advantage in being able to go on established paper and like establish relationships and actually get into some of these big accounts. I mean, and how have you seen that play out?
Yeah, it's a huge point, especially in enterprise. Let's move and focus on big deals, right? So for those that are going and trying to get into Fortune 5 and do big contracts with bigger players, there's always partners in the mix that you should definitely be navigating. It should be part of your navigation and discovery process is to find out who those main players are, right? You really want to ask, frankly. So the big consulting are usually in there, your Accenture, your PwCs and McKinsey's, et cetera, et cetera. So asking, depending on what part of the organization you're selling into and whatnot, you want to open up that conversation just to understand from there. But to your point, I mean, some of these partners that you can establish relationships with have huge contracts that are already in place and have been in place for a long time. There's relationships that are already been forged. So the main way to get pulled up market, or you're endeavoring to the enterprise, is to maybe go through one of those parties. So you need to establish that. We could go deep into this, but no, there's establishing how do you establish that relationship at first with one of those partners, and then how do you think about joining up, the who's really trying to grow on that side? How do you kind of establish that relationship together? Because we all know that if you're not in with the right person, even if you get into that partner discussion, it's still not going to go very far, to your previous point, right? You do need to think about that as its own cycle. And this is where, again, the calories comment comes in, where you're needing to actually recruit and establish and build trust and sell to that partner about going to bat with you just as much as you are with the enterprise customer. So really what we're referencing is if someone has that relationship already, it can definitely be hugely advantageous to you in the enterprise, because to your point, your master services agreement, your MSA, as you mentioned, the documentation process that these enterprise do go through, and in working with them, you can step past a bunch of that stuff potentially with a partner that's already in there. You could go on their paper, and by formatting that properly, you can take a 12 months to forever deal, going by yourself as the small startup, to 6 months, maybe less, because you've established that relationship, and then you're able to go in through that route. So that's a big one for sure to think about. I know you've had some experience with this. Maybe elaborate a bit more on that point.
Well, that's the thing. For all the drawbacks of some partnerships that I've seen, and all the pain of exclusivity and going through a resale arrangement where we couldn't have our own sales team, at the other end of that, we also got some major, huge customers very quickly because we were on established paper. And I'm talking like a couple of meetings, the next meeting, this was literally signed off on. Whereas if we had tried to establish that relationship in the beginning with nothing and no background, huge infosec process. And I've done that too. And so I know the pain of it. And so it's a real consideration if you're trying to do enterprise sales early, which is always dangerous. But if you are doing that, and as Chad, you said, it's not going to be simple to get Deloitte or some other big partner to take you seriously. It's a sales cycle in its own right, but it's worth doing, because the amount that you'll save in just the onboarding process of getting into a major bank or getting into a major retailer, it's really huge. Like it's a real major difference in terms of all the infosec and everything else to go through.
Well, without naming names, I think we should talk through a couple of case studies of this that we've both, I mean, there's one that you and I have worked on together, which we can talk about for sure related to this. I can tell a quick story as well from my experience.
Yeah.
To a lot of banks, like previous company, we sold into the finance world quite a bit. And so with the banks, we all know, especially here in Canada, the big four banks, there's long processes there, right? If you want to sell to them, you have to go on this journey we're talking about. So I think this segues into not only leveraging partners, but just enterprise selling as well for those that are on that path. But you're always thinking about, when you're in the sales cycle with that customer, that prospect, where are the leverage points within the ecosystem? So the example I'll give is one of the big four banks. We actually worked with all of them in the previous business, but one of them in particular, we got deep into the infosec, and we're pretty far down the path, probably a good 6-7 months into the sales cycle. But we were getting there, and we hit a pretty big hiccup. It was on the accessibility topic. And this is probably a topic that a lot of software folks out there should be thinking about, but how accessible is your platform, right? And we hit this, like, we weren't even thinking about it, right? This is fairly early days, and we got all the way down this path and realized, like, we haven't thought about this in at the level of detail that we needed to, certainly for what they were asking in the security and accessibility questionnaires. So what I did in that case was I quickly looked at the ecosystem around it, accessibility, and like who could help us with this in the deal. And so ended up finding an expert, a guy that had written, the book, so to speak, especially in Canada, and flew him in to Toronto, and he joined me in the next meeting as part of our company. right? And he wowed them. Like I'll never forget this. It just he blew me away, he blew them away, and he literally knew every single thing about it and how it was going to be rectified, how we were going to update things, when it would be done, project plan, all of the above. And he won the deal for us. 2 weeks later, we had signed paperwork, and that was, not a partnership that had been thought about, and we, like we set up this big partnership, and it was in the deal. It was in the deal, and realizing requirements and understanding that early. And I always push founders and sales leaders I work with around like early in the process, understand, decision process and criteria. And this comes into like med pick, and we can talk about that, probably a whole podcast on that alone. But in enterprise selling, like knowing the stuff earlier in terms of what gates are we stepping through, right? Like what are we actually going to run into, so that you can go back to the office or back to Zoom with your team and actually talk about, like, these are the gaps that we currently have if we want to do business with this company. And then you can look at the world of partnering and other folks that can support you, and you can get strategic, and you can plan out that opportunity accordingly, and then you can win the business. And so I just wanted to highlight that story, because I think it's one that isn't just, oh, we have this like well-known name as a partner. It's more that in deals themselves, based on the different stakeholders and the complexity of what's going on, you just need to be very aware of those sort of elements. And so I would highlight, accessibility is a big one, single sign-on. So like SSO and Okta, and like, again, like being able to get your product to be available in their environment. A lot of stuff related to infosec, security, right? Those types of things, especially in the enterprise, you really want to make sure that you're thinking about that earlier, and you're establishing if it's some partnerships that you need, or some folks that can support you in making sure, even if it's as you're implementing your solution, those are really key partnerships to think about, especially when you're working with bigger, enterprise type companies.
Yeah, it's a great story. I mean, I could talk about one too, where it's not quite the same as that one. We had actually broken down the doors of a major financial services Fortune 100 company. Been working with them for 8 months. Got to the EVP level. A guy who has 4,500 people report into him. Had this guy after the meeting, say, "Let's move forward with this." You kind of jump up and down, you high five, and then it goes into the procurement wheel, right? Then it goes into a completely different part of the business and suddenly your business contacts and everything else matter, but they can only do so much. That these guys are completely walled off, right? And it's a completely different world. And when you don't have an existing MSA, and you can have the greatest security architecture in the world, but these are slow slogging processes. So we ended up bringing in a partner just to flip paper, just to get this done, actually on the executive's request, because he was like, "Look, I want to get this implemented, and this is pretty much the only way to do this." So there's strategically bringing them into the cycle to help you actually win over the executive level, and there's also just getting past the slow-wheeled mechanics of a major Fortune 100 business, and that's just the reality. It sucks to say. I mean, there are lots of great new technologies, but you can go into the Bank of Americas of the world or the Goldman Sachs of the world, and they'll tell you themselves, like, there's tons of technology that we would love to buy, and we literally can't buy it because our processes are so arduous.
Yeah. I guess, that's almost just the reality, and the caution flag around, before you go to enterprise, you need to button this stuff up. It's just the way it is. So, especially in, the financial institutions or financial services, but others as well, right? Really any of the companies past a certain size, they have in-depth processes for vendors, and you need to outline and understand those very early in the process, so that you can bring in the partners. You can think about how these partners engage with you, and that's a collaborative, back to the co-selling and the ability to do that. So it's never too early to establish these relationships. I always just, think about it as marketing together first, right? You definitely know the end customer well, and how you can support them even better with some other parties, and think about it that way first. And then a lot of the stuff, the more detailed stuff we talk about, naturally evolves. It naturally starts to happen where, okay, like, this is, my target list. And you do account planning, you can do account mapping, you can use tools like Crossbeam and Partner Stack. And there's some, and you can check out these tools once you get there. But there's some interesting ways nowadays that you can really collaboratively using software, and the fact that we're all using CRM tools and things of that nature to account map and to properly go at specific channels together. And that's pretty exciting. And I think, partnerships really, especially with earlier stage companies, are not even scratching the surface yet. I think we're going to enter an entirely new world of integration, of the way that consolidation continues to happen within companies and acquisitions, and just how products continually to help each other out, because there's so many different types of products now and different value points. So it's exciting times in partnerships. And I think it's, to summarize, I think it's like trying to focus on the front end, do some marketing side stuff first, start to collaborate, build some joint efforts. And then you can sort of move it ideally to, more heavy distribution models once you're ready and prepared to do so.
Yeah, the word you said earlier is so apt, which is leverage, right? You can put leverage in the right places and you can put it in the wrong places and have things blow up. Partnerships are leverage, and they can be massively, massively helpful and have you win huge customers early that you had, frankly, no chance at winning as a small startup yourself. And you can set up a resale model with this exclusivity and really screw yourself over too. So it's just really, should you go after partnerships? Yes, absolutely. I mean, if they're used right, they can boost you huge. It's just kind of being thoughtful about it and knowing which customer segments you want to use them for. And as you said, testing the relationship early and making sure it's going to be a good one for both parties.
Yeah. Yeah. Just be careful about, the calories spent, right? Depending on how early you are as a business, it's back to testing and iterating, especially if you're just getting started and you're kind of figuring out a lot of the basics or the foundational aspects, the segments and who your customer is, ideal customer profile stuff. You could spend a lot of time chasing partners and not really get anywhere. So that's just a caution point. But yeah, like once you've got your own deals moving, you've proven you have some social proof, you've case studies, you've closed X amount of deals, whatever that number may be. I think absolutely, right? Start talking to your marketplace, right? That can be marketing as your marketing side gets moving, talking to everyone, like just doing the research, frankly, looking at who else sort of plays in our world. How can we establish some good relationships together, and then things start to happen from there. And it does force you to get your enablement together that we touched on as well. Like when you have all the different types of documents for the buying cycle, as well as, awareness and marketing, and then how customer success works, how implementation works, and a lot of these sort of artifacts that you continue to build over time. It forces you to get that sort of enablement kit, is the term I use, in play earlier, because you're talking to partners, which can help. It helps your internal team as well, because realistically they should be the same thing. You're supporting an internal sales force, you're supporting others to be able to tell the same story that you're telling. It sort of weaves together your website and collateral all the way through to ultimately how that's going to be maybe in a partner portal and going to support any of these channel partners.
Yeah, to your point, they're their own sales cycles. I mean, you have to have your stuff together to even get some of these big partners, but you can do that. You can do it early if you get to the right people. All right. Well, thanks again, man, for joining me. So for those listening, Chad and I are going to be doing this every week. You can reach out to Chad or myself on LinkedIn. We'd love to get your thoughts on other topics to cover. We get these from startups that we're working with, but yeah, we'd love to get other thoughts. Chad, anything else that you wanted to point out before we?
No, absolutely. I think, based on the weekly office hour concept, there's any questions, any things that are on the minds of you guys, send them our way. We plan on getting tactical. We can get into very specific things and give you guys some key insights. I think we'll also we've talked about some of the various frameworks and things that we've built over time that can be helpful to you guys. So yeah, look forward to these, and look forward to your feedback, everyone.
Cool.